Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before we begin, in about 5 minutes' time, we want to make the opportunity available. If anybody had a question or two regarding any of the items on the agenda, now would be the time. All right, sir. Go ahead and ask the question, and I'll repeat it to make sure it's in the system. Yeah. All right, so the question essentially is that if a provision were made so that in the end result we erred on the side of caution and there were more costs associated with the development than was anticipated, or we received more grants rather than we anticipated, would there be the possibility of allowing a developer to get a prorated return to make it equalize? If we take option one. Okay. All right. I don't believe that's something that's available under the legislation. Mr. Butterworth, do you want to answer that?
I don't know the legislation off the top of my head on that either for that particular instance. I wasn't anticipating a question like that, so I would have to look into it unless Ms. Lovegrove.
However, maybe to get around that question as well, it is entirely possible, though, because Council is going to have to make an estimate one way or the other. We're either going to underestimate or overestimate any grant funding that's coming in. So there would likely be a call on either side for some sort of an adjustment once that reality is known and comes to be. So in that circumstance, there's nothing that would prevent us to reopen the DCC bylaw and make an adjustment at that time, correct? Here's a question that I have, though. If indeed you do that, as there's always a year-long delay in terms of implementing a DCC, are we aware if that would still stipulate, even for a small change? Okay, so as you know, there's a year delay from the time we adopt to actual implementation. If we were to reopen it, say, in 6 months' time, just as a number, and make an adjustment as a result of a change in funding, is that going to reinstitute a further year-long? It would not trigger the same thing. And the process would be, I would expect, significantly lesser than obviously going through a capital plan and a whole series of capital projects and all the debate around it. It's just a matter of making an amendment and changing the number. Okay. But ultimately, Council has to make an estimate one way or the other. It'll be an interesting discussion when we get to that point. And without further ado, that brings us basically to the beginning of our Council meeting. I have one more question. Go ahead, Mr. Round. Just say it and I'll repeat it. We're a little short on time, so we've got to keep it very succinct. Okay, Mr. Round, I'm looking for a question, not an opinion at this time. Just give us the question.
Well, I'd like to have the opportunity to make a statement.
We're 1 minute away from the official meeting, so can you just give us the question? We're very aware of the issues. Okay, I really do have to stop you there, Mr. Round. Mr. Round, I have to stop you. I got to call this meeting to order. Yeah. Mr. Round? Mr. Round? No. Mr. Round, I'm trying to be polite here. All right, we have to call the meeting to order now. You haven't even given me a question. You've given me your statement. Okay, so I'm calling the meeting to order, sir. We have to get this meeting underway. If you continue to disrupt the meeting, I will ask for your removal, okay? And I don't want to go there. All right, with no further ado, I'm going to call this meeting to order. And we will start actually with a traditional beginning of the new year mayoral address, which I have here before me. As you all know, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not a big fan of reading long-winded speeches, so instead I've asked our communications officer to sit down and go over a number of the projects that Council was so diligently working on this last year, and then we will touch on a little bit of what we might expect into the new year. So, Council, no one can for a moment suggest that you haven't been busy. Let me tell you, after trying to go through this list and all of the items and having to remove so many other things that we simply wouldn't have time to talk about this evening, I will begin with just some of the top sort of legislative decisions that we made back in 2013. First and foremost, you recall the bylaw adjudication process that we undertook, and that was at the beginning of the year. And that was actually a very well-constructed effort to streamline what was causing a whole bunch of tie-up with our staff around administering our bylaws. And I have to say that since we implemented that, I believe, and you can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Comas, that it certainly had a positive effect as we had hoped and intended, and it's continuing to help us, again, manage an always increasing file around bylaw enforcement. You, of course, I don't need to repeat this by any stretch of the imagination. You recall how much work we did in completing our official community plan. We were very happy to see that finally adopted this past summer. And as I said to a group in Nanaimo not too long ago of construction folks, you know, when we talk about process, one of the first and fundamental, most important things is to have an up-to-date official community plan. By making sure your plan reflects your housing needs and all of the other aspirations of the community, you really do save a lot of time in process, because as it was out of date, we were causing all sorts of OCP amendments and angst within the community occurring all the time, and that really is like a separate process. We reviewed our permissive tax exemptions. We all know that. There is a very difficult task to undertake, and we spent a lot of time going back and forth in that area, talking very much about a variety of different approaches and working with our community. And where others have failed, we were able to deliver a new revised permissive tax exemption policy that protects the taxpayer but still provides some certainty for all the many groups that count on those permissive exemptions. We changed our strategic planning process significantly and moved to a more process-orientated approach, and that came at the heels of, I think, some real dissatisfaction amongst members of council and others about how we did strategic planning. So now we have a very different approach to move forward with, and on that particular file we're not yet complete. We still have to complete it, but most of the work is done. We introduced a new billing system for our water users, and we had some concerns again about how the charges were presented, and as you can recall, option 1A, option 2A, C, B, we went back and forth a great deal working with staff and a variety of folks within the community to come up with the very best approach, which of course is now reducing the tier charges for residential and including fixed charges for water infrastructure. And I'm pleased to say that since that time I've had very few calls about water rates, or at least in the context of them being unfairly structured, although you'll note in today's package there is a concern about a leak. We began the DCC review process, which we're obviously going to be talking about today, and that's been quite an extensive process. And then more recently, just again on the legislative side, we introduced the intercommunity business license. We really did take the lead role on that. There were 12 communities involved. There was a lot of work behind the scenes initially to get 12 different organizations all on the same page, but it was accomplished, and as a result, many of our, especially those in the trade and construction associations members, now are able to have a streamlined process and not having to pay multiple business license fees when really there is no necessity to do that. Moving on, the Oceanside Health Center opened in 2013, ladies and gentlemen. That was obviously a very big step for us. Having said that, as we said at the time, it is not the final solution. There is still tremendous need in our community. We still have a community that has the oldest population in the entire country, and by that I'm talking about Oceanside as a whole, the Parks-Colquhoun Beach area, and there are needs that are associated with that we need to continue to stay on top of. And I was very happy to see that the Federation of Residents Associations, who were an integral part in getting us that original health center that just opened, are very much going to be focused on the file. And as some of you may have read, I've recently been spending a lot of time at our regional hospital, and I'm not going to get into it tonight, but there is still tremendous need within the system, and we do definitely have to stay on top of this. In terms of infrastructure, number of major infrastructure projects. I'm not going to go through them all, but of course you know about the Highway 19A between Molliet and Rushton Lane, all of that work that was done, getting that intersection in place and the lights up and a better situation for all the folks traveling off of Bay, and I believe we achieved our goals there. We of course saw the Community Park Sports Field receive a significant improvement, rehabilitation, and received about $177,000 in federal funding to enable that to occur. And all my reports that I've received to date, at least in terms of the folks that have been using it in an unstructured way, have been very positive on the new field. It reopened on October 25th. We saw the installation of some electronic vehicle charging stations, 2 right here and others. And you know, it's interesting, ladies and gentlemen, you actually do see people hooking up to those and using them, and they're not just the usual sorts that are always around, but even in one case, I was talking to some tourists that were all the way up from California, and they were very pleased to find that charging station here. We, of course, installed the Sunray Stairs not too long ago, and I still continue to get accolades from folks within that neighborhood, whether it be on the street or even in terms of phone calls and emails. And I've been told it's getting a lot of use, and people are very, very happy to finally have access down to the waterfront there. We did a number of safety improvements along Despard Avenue, and this is the area that is in between Craig and the highway. As you recall, there's been quite a lot of concern about movements of kids and various people, and so we infilled a ditch there and did what we could in an interim basis to basically improve that and provide some shoulder for the folks, and hopefully made that a slightly safer, if not much more safer, stretch of road. And it's my hope that as that area develops, we'll have opportunity to take it to the next level and really help keep the kids off the street there. As you can imagine, there's a lot of traffic with the middle school right there and the elementary school on the other side of the highway. There's a lot of walking traffic, especially younger people going between the two. We, of course, implemented, or rather installed, our first labyrinth, which I think has also been a big hit, and it was quite enjoyable to be down there and to see that happen. And you know, it wasn't a huge project, but it's just one more little added feature in our wonderful waterfront park. We had the Ballina Civic Actions Group working very closely with our staff and others, refurbish the Nichols Park on Pym Street, and I'm pleased to report there'll be some trees being planted there this year. But that was a very positive project. It was great to see the younger people get involved and take pride in their community, and good on staff for allowing that to occur as easily as they were able to do so. We received input very much for the next big project, and that is still underway, and I would advise you, ladies and gentlemen, to keep your eyes on that, and that's the Temple Street corridor from Bay Avenue all the way to Phillips Street. And anyone who's traveled down that corridor knows that it is likely in very good timing to see that redevelop. And of course, with the changes we've made at the intersection there, I would expect that you would see heightened traffic on there as well. And that too is a huge, huge project, and it's requiring a lot of work in the background. Moving on to our fire department. We saw them update their strategic plan. There was a lot of work around that, including an online resident survey. They were successful in their recruitment program last year. They set new records in the food and toy drive, which is a really positive thing to see. And we did approve a contract for the purchase of a new fire engine for the department, with delivery scheduled for May 2014. The new truck will be built to the same specifications as the truck delivered to the department in late 2011. Standardization of apparatus is a major goal of the department and will help to reduce training costs long term. The Englishman River Water Service obviously been very busy this past year with all sorts of work involved. One significant change, of course, is that we are now getting to the point where we really are paring down to the details, and the city's engaged CH2M Hill to be the prime consultants on that part of the process, and we're meeting on an ongoing basis at a community level. In fact, we have one even tomorrow morning in order to ensure that we end up with a project that we can all be very, very proud of. Within the community, Global BC broadcast was something that I think was received very well by the city. I certainly continued to get comments on that. I even got emails from the mainland and other places who happened to see it, and I think the stars aligned perfectly on that one. It was a beautiful evening. The crowd that showed up was incredibly positive and great in number, and I know from talking with the crews there, they, well, I can't say it officially, but I'll say it unofficially. I think we were their favorite stop, at least up until that point. They did say it. We had many successful community events, and although we struggled at times with some of those events, primarily around ensuring we had enough volunteers, it was great to see the Bethlehem Walk return this year, and with some work, I think we've been able to preserve the Pumpkin Walk, which was missing this past year, as well as the Easter egg hunt coming up in Foster Park. So this is still an area, though, I think we have to stay somewhat focused on, make sure that we don't lose the vibrancy of our community, and continue to engage and encourage people to get involved with these events, and of course support them to the extent that we can on council. We had one heck of, I think, a really good town council meeting in October last year, you may recall. Two very potentially controversial topics, right? Casinos, marijuana, but yet had a wonderful crowd in. Not to say that they were all in agreement with everything that was being said, but certainly we had some great discussions. Everyone was very much focused on having a good engagement, and I hope that we can continue those this year prior to the end, because I think from everyone I spoke to that was at that meeting, everyone seemed to really feel that that was a great way to engage community and to be able to express their views in a very sort of relaxed and less official way. We had the official opening of the Parksville-Qualicum Beach Links waymarking, which are those little signs that you see that tell you that if you follow this road and that road and this road, you will end up in Qualicum Beach, and of course in the reverse order, the same signs point you to Parksville, and that's all, of course, in promoting greater bicycle use. And you know, I'm kind of surprised actually how many folks that really do use bikes are in this community, and how many of them are actually older seniors that seem to be really engaging it, not only as a great way to get around, but also to remain fit. So not a major project, but one that I think is important because it sends a very positive message. And of course, one other great addition, and it's congratulations again, as I often am saying that word in respect to the Parksville Lions. Congratulations to them as they included into our community park the Parksville Lions Outdoor Gym and Mobility Challenge to Access project. And so we have now a park that is completely inclusive of every age category, of every ability, and I hope we can continue to build upon that. It is certainly something that, as I said at the time, we're going to have to start calling that place down there Lions Country, because the Lions Club really have taken a real leadership role in making that park just an ongoing jewel in our crown. That was the year. That's not an exhaustive list by any imagination. I could have gone on, but I know you want to move on to the meeting. The only thing I will say looking forward is that we have a challenging year ahead, ladies and gentlemen. We have a number of issues that we're going to have to deal with as a city, not least of which is DCCs. I think, as always, the more we're willing to work together and to keep calm and focused, the better the result will be. And I know Council, with all the experience now behind this table, is well prepared to try and make the best decisions possible, taking everyone into account, whether it's dealing with DCCs, whether it's dealing with how we're going to build and deliver the water treatment plant, and any other host of issues that we might see come before us. One challenge, of course, that we need to keep our eyes on, and although it's not specifically in our mandate, it is one where we have a lot to gain or lose, and that's the ongoing issue with our school district and what to do with those facilities. And although, again, it may not be our immediate mandate in terms of education, those buildings and ultimately what becomes of them does fall into our realm, and we need to ensure that we ultimately have the right solutions in place to protect our city now and well into the future. All right, so that was the year, sort of, and let us now proceed directly into the next item of business, which is the adoption of the minutes of the closed meeting of council held, oh sorry, that's the wrong one, that's for our closed meeting after, of the council meeting held December 16, 2013. Okay, moved by Councillor Lefebvre, seconded by Councillor Morrison. Are there any errors or omissions in those minutes? All right, seeing none, all in favor, opposed, and those minutes are adopted. Thank you. I now need approval of our agenda. Moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Morrison. Are there any additions to the agenda this evening, or changes, alterations, or errors? I do note that a page is being replaced in your booklets, page 6 of 8, actually page 82 of 90. Make sure you have that available. And other than that, if there are no additions or changes, all in favor, opposed, and that's carried. The agenda is approved. We have one delegation this night, ladies and gentlemen, and that is the Mid-Vancouver Island Habitat Enhancement Society presenting us the Englishman River update. And I think, Ms. Smith, I presume you're the lead on this.
Sure, I'll just give a little background. Thank you very much, Your Worship, and council and staff. And as you said, I'm Faye Smith. I'm project coordinator with Mid-Vancouver Island Habitat Enhancement Society. And we're here tonight to tell you about the habitat status report that we had done. And this report is based on the template DFO uses for watersheds throughout the coast area. And although this was not a DFO sponsored report, it's MVI HES. It is certainly offered to DFO, and our watershed can be compared with others. So we felt that this was a good time for this type of report. It's a habitat status, and in that regard, it's an update, really, of all the reports that have gone on in the last, say, 12, 15 years that we've been involved with the Englishman River, and that's since, especially since the beginning of the Pacific Salmon Endowment Fund's watershed recovery plan for the Englishman River. And since from 2001 to 2006, there was a lot of funding, a lot of reports, a lot of action on the Englishman River, and we were coordinating that. And I'm happy to say that that since the funding was finished in 2006, the steering committee that was put together for that watershed recovery plan has continued to meet 2 or 3 times a year at least, and compare notes and activities on the river. So this report then is kind of an update on the habitat status, and that's salmon habitat that we're concerned with. And the way things are right now, we feel that this is the right time for a lot more citizen involvement in this river. And we're using this report as kind of a springboard to other activities that the community can become involved in. And so I'm going to ask my colleague, Peter Law, to do the PowerPoint presentation. I believe you have in your package, and I'm sorry I didn't get it to you sooner, the condensation of the report. And I know Councillor Lefebvre has seen it, and Peter Law did that condensation. So he's really a good person to carry on with the little more description of the habitat status report. Peter?
Great. Thank you, Faye. Your Worship, councillors, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My goal here is really to just provide a snapshot of the report. It's not going to the report's well over 100 pages and with appendices. So we're just going to hit the highlights. So really, as Faye has identified, it's a report on the habitat condition for fish and fish habitat in the river. The study design it's based on a review of published reports compiled over the past 25 years on the watershed. We had a consultant review over 40 reports on fish habitat assessments, 3 reports on the estuary, 3 reports on groundwater and the influence on the river, and an interview of over six resource experts, local resource experts. The report's organized in 3 parts. First part is a habitat summary of existing conditions. Second is the habitat pressures, i.e. the forces that shape the river. And of course, part 3, restoration and monitoring, where to from here, especially for community groups. Now, when it comes to part 1, what I want to try and do is just highlight what the city of Parksville might be interested in particular with this report. Part 1, when it comes to habitat summaries, if you just look at this table just briefly, what you'll see is a good news story. We have really, over the last 10 years, seen some significant changes to escapements of salmon in this watershed. We've seen over 20 times more Chinook return to the watershed as we're here in the 1970s. Chum salmon have increased 4 times, coho 5 times, and this year was an incredible escapement. Pink salmon, 10 times more fish in this watershed in the last few years as compared to 25 to 30 years ago. Now, there are some caveats to that. 2 of these populations, Chinook and pink, have had hatchery enhancement. But needless to say, the trends are there. These are significant movements, and the watershed is responding to this particular metrics of watershed health. Salmon populations are returning to the Englishman River. However, it's interesting to note, steelhead are not returning in this same category. When it comes to habitat pressures, I'm going to focus on 3 issues or 3 areas that have an influence to the city of Parksville. For sure, the estuary is a very, very important spot. It's a series of interlocking ecosystems. Our consultant reported on that, and how important these ecosystems, how they interact, and how highly valued they are for fish. The consultant, of course, picked up on the issue of invasive plants, and especially waterfowl and geese, Canada geese in particular, and how that is harming native plant populations down there. And ultimately, it is of concern how the estuary is going to maintain itself in the future number of years. We have an issue down there concerning development and encroachment of shoreline hardening. We understand that this is a private property maintenance issue. However, it does have consequences. Stormwater contamination within the estuary was identified by our consultant as an ongoing issue. When it comes to the Englishman River main stem, there are several issues that are brought forward. I'm going to highlight a few of them here. One was low flows in the summertime. The Englishman River was a chronic low-flow stream during the summer periods. That had major implications to rearing salmonid populations. However, that has been rectified to a significant degree by the introduction of low flows from the Arrowsmith Lake and the AWS, ERWS agreements that are there now. So that issue is succeeded to improvements that we're now probably seeing. In terms of recent reports being done on groundwater, we're starting to understand how groundwater contributes to the river. This is very, very important as we move forward. The next 3 items are associated with the historical logging that occurred in this watershed over the last 100 years. Over 80% of this watershed is owned by 2 timber companies. So how they've managed these lands over time has been significant in terms of the overall pressure on the river. There's been some significant impacts in association with the removal of riparian forests that were highly valued in the historical terms. They continue to be highly valued, however, they don't exist because they've been mined. So this has caused the river to not have the kinds of confinement that are normally seen in coastal British Columbia rivers when they're left alone. So we do have an excess of erosion and a loss of riverbank stability. We also see a loss of complexity of woody debris in the streams and increased sedimentation. Those large gravel bars that we see on the river are something that are going to take several decades before they move through the system. There were habitat pressures identified to the remainder of the tributaries to the watershed. I'm not going to go into them. However, I was going to bring forward Shelley Creek as it does go through this community. And these were the primary issues identified by our consultant: low flows, poor water quality, man-made barriers to fish migration, and potential impacts to the aquifer from land development. Be that as it may, these issues should be put into context that Shelley Creek remains an extremely important tributary to the Englishman River. Through the work of Faye and the volunteers of the Mid-Vancouver Island Habitat Stewards, we've over the last 3 years been monitoring smolt escapements at Martindale Road, and we're noticing extremely large numbers, extraordinary numbers, up to 8,000 to 10,000 coho smolts going through this smolt trap in the springtime period. Now, this is only a stream that's accessible to salmon for 500 meters. So to see that number of fish in a very short area is phenomenal. So we understand now that the linkages between the main stem Englishman River has with coho, as the river goes into winter freshet, the fish move into the lower Shelley Creek, and so it's a very, very important backwater for these fish to maintain themselves. So it's very, very important that we understand and consider how Shelley Creek is being managed into the future. And in that frame, I bring forward the subject of integrated stormwater management. As the city looks to improve your drainage management planning and your master drainage plan, we understand over the next year, there's some important guidance document available for you. This is a document that was produced in April 2012, and it was done for the city of Parksville. And I just bring it forward today to point out that it does have some guidance in how the city should consider how stormwater management occurs, especially in small streams like Shelley Creek. So, the question the Mid-Vancouver Island Stewards has been putting forward is, how do we as a community ensure the watershed's future health? And we see the answer to that question as being twofold: monitoring of key metrics to ensure proper habitat function, and restoration to improve habitat function over time. So that healthy watershed goal is where we're moving, and we're building off a successful stewardship fair that we had last weekend just right across the way here. We had over 60 people come, and we promoted to those citizens an awareness of the local watershed and training in how to monitor for a healthy watershed. In particular, we looked at low flows, water quality, photo point monitoring, and a number of other speakers to those issues. And of course, from here on, we're going to be moving forward with further training and restoration. So that's our presentation, and we feel that the future is in our hands. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So I'll open it to members of council if you have any questions or comments. Councillor Greer.
Thank you very much for a great presentation. Everything looks very positive and exciting. My question is, what's the discussion been about the geese? Because I understand they're probably the worst situation in the estuary. And we seem to keep going around this problem year in and year out. I know for the 6 years that I've been here, we keep talking about something to be done and nothing's being done.
Yeah,
so can you bring us up to date on what you might be thinking of doing or what you're going to support?
There is a group, as you probably know, the Guardians of the Mid-Island Estuaries, and it seems to be, I think they had a 3-year program, and maybe there's another year to go. From what I've just picked up is that things are actually improving on the Englishman River Estuary as far as the, sorry, got it wrong, on the Little Qualicum Estuary. The numbers of geese are declining, but unfortunately the Englishman River are not the case. So,
do you feel they're coming from Qualicum down to Parksall?
No, no.
Have they got a free ticket down here?
No, I don't know. There's more hunters out on
Thank you
Little
very much.
Qualicum.
I think I recall that where they're nesting can be a factor, apparently, or the thought was, if I recall what the one biologist suggested for Englishmen here, because not all of them are nesting in the estuary. It's hard to control their populations, and perhaps more so that was happening in Little Qualicum. And you're right, it is a 3-year program. We've allocated some funding to it, and part of it is to build a case so that if indeed we need to do a kill, then we are showing that we've done everything else that we possibly can do prior to that ultimate, not wanting to, but having to, final step.
Yeah. So I hope something happens soon because we're losing it.
It's a crisis, I agree. Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much, Peter and Faye, for your presentation. I'm going to propose that, given the problems with Shelley Creek, because the origins of Shelley Creek are beyond the Shelley property, I'm going to propose that you come to the RDN board and make a similar presentation, because there's a responsibility there, and I know that you made the presentation at the AWS meeting we had several weeks ago, but I think that the rest of the board should hear it and mention the fact that it's important to find out what's going on up there, and I think everybody has a responsibility, along with the monitoring that you want the private citizens to do.
Yes, absolutely, and we've in fact already arranged for that, and we have been working with the RDN and MOE and their community watershed monitoring program for water quality, and certainly the water quality is one of the things that we're basing our concern on. So.
With regards to your part of your presentation when you talked about runoff water and surface water and that sort of thing, you are working with the city staff, are you not? I think that I talked to Mr. Figueroa. He's here tonight. I believe that you're working hand in glove with there you go. Okay. But I gather that I know that Mr. Manson isn't here tonight, but my understanding is through Mr. Figueroa and Mr. Manson that you'll be working with his group to as we go forward in our own plans for water management and drainage and that sort of thing.
Yes, I'd certainly like to, and we sometimes have, can apply for funding and work jointly that way, and so we'll be talking.
Well, thanks again for all you do. You're a great organization to have in our community.
Other questions, comments from members of council? Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Peter and Faye, for coming this evening, and also for all the work that your organization is doing. We around the council table get the value of it, and I hear your call to go out to the community for some more assistance. I'm wondering if we might take advantage of our friends in media being here, and can you just, in a sentence or two, say why the community might want to consider getting involved?
Well, I think there are a lot of reasons. One is that there's not as much government oversight, senior government, that is. It's also, I think, the awareness of the importance of our watershed, and especially the Englishmen. I mean, to not only the residents around here, but in other communities, that we have to look after it. And so that was been really the focus of well, after the report, our activities are going to be going in that direction, that people look after their own watershed. It's for their own interest, for their own health, as well as the health of the watershed. And if we look at the kinds of targets that we might have, we want to have clean water for drinking, but we want to have clean water for swimming, and we want to have healthy wildlife, which includes fish, of course. So, yeah, it's time. It's time that people started caring for their own watersheds.
All right. Any further comments or questions? So I just wanted to say thank you again on behalf of Council to you both for your ongoing efforts. Thank you, Mr. Law. Thank you, Faye. I'm going to say it even though I know you probably don't like it, but you were the very first conservation champion from both communities, having gotten together and thinking, you know, is there one person out there that really has dedicated a tremendous amount of time and effort to our environment and for the betterment of our entire region, and you came to mind immediately in both of those scenarios. So it's well earned, and I appreciate your discussion around outflows. We've had some challenges. We have a whole area of the city that resides above the estuary, and I know our staff, I've had discussions with Mr. Figuera several times about this. Our staff are looking to improve upon the way our waters flow out there and to ensure that we can do what we can to prevent any contamination getting into that awfully sensitive area. And so definitely we'll want to work more in the future together on that. And obviously the monitoring is as logic can be. I mean, if you can't monitor and measure it, how can you manage it? So it's great that we have your volunteers out there working with us and watching all of those gauges and testing and all of that. And you know, I thank you for the acknowledgement of the AWS system and the control of flows, obviously, on that river. That has been very impactful, but boy, have you folks ever improved the habitat in any number of places along that river, and that is, I'm sure, made an equal, if not greater, impact in seeing some of those stocks come up. So they need more than water, right? They need the habitat, and they need the food sources and all of that. So thank you very, very much for your ongoing efforts, and I'm sure we'll be talking lots in the future. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're moving on to correspondence. We have two items of correspondence this evening. The first is a letter from the Parksville and District Chamber of Commerce regarding the 13th Annual Glassies Community Awards. And there is an associated recommendation related to our annual sponsorship of the Citizen of the Year. Is there a member of council that's prepared to make that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Powell-Davidson, second of Councillor Morrison. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Thank you. And that's a good thing, because they've already booked me in to do part of the selection committee on that Citizen of the Year appointment. Moving on to the second item of correspondence, and this is from Rascal Trucking Limited. It's a utilities account issue at 1080 Industrial Way. There's a recommendation to receive for the moment. If we can get someone to move that, then we can have a discussion around it, if so desired. Moved by Councillor Lefebvre, seconded by Councillor Neufeld. So, on that recommendation, is there any discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Worship. I have questions that I need some answers to. With regards to the report that was made by the CGA involved, who's responsible for monitoring water? I see in the letter from the CGA that they had the watchman check the water meter after they found out that there was a leak. I don't understand why. I guess we send bills just once a year after do we continuously read the meter? We read the meter twice a year, and in the first part of the year that didn't show that there was an abnormal use of water, just on the second reading. Is that what happened?
Go ahead, Mr. Butterworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, we do two readings a year, one in the spring. That reading is taken in early March, and we do another reading in October. So in the second reading, that their usage was high, so they're requesting. They had a leak adjustment done one other time within the 5-year period. So I just suggested if they, we could not give them another leak adjustment unless they came to council. So.
I guess I'm going to follow up that with a question, if you wouldn't mind. And this may be more directed to you, Mr. Figuera, but in terms of the meters that we use, is it reasonable that a ordinary citizen could read a meter on a more frequent basis if they were concerned about the potential of water loss? I've never actually read a meter, so is it something that just is like an old school hydro-mechanical meter? Is it something you could look at and say, oh, you know what, the number's awfully high, or is it, I would assume, an ongoing number that increases until such time as you read it and reset it, right?
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, the meters do have a register on them. It depends on the location of the meter. They can be in chambers, so they might be difficult to read. We use a touchless system, so when our meter readers read them, they use a for lack of a better term, like a wand that they can apply to the meter so that they can read it almost remotely. A lot of these meters are in chambers. They're fairly deep. They would be sometimes difficult for a person to actually access and read, but they most certainly do have a register on them that they can read.
But it sure sounds like we don't want the average Joe to be opening up chambers and getting in there and trying to interpret what their meter is.
That would be a fair assumption, although if they do have a concern, that they are able to, you know, often see the register and read it.
Right. And it's obviously impractical. We don't have the manpower, the ability to go on a monthly basis or something and read everyone's meter in the city, as you can appreciate.
If I may, Your Worship, that was my ultimate question. Who is responsible to monitor? I mean, if you get a bill after the fact and the horse has left the barn, it's too late to do anything about it, and it's impossible to physically monitor all of the water meters that say, hey, there's 5 leaks over here and there's 10 leaks over there. So this puts us in a situation where it seems that the only way that you can find out about a leak is once you get your bill.
Which is why we likely have the policy in place that within any given 5-year period, if there is a loss of water, and it obviously comes as a surprise to a client, that we would, refund the difference, look at what their traditional charge is, and then refund the difference. The question is, how often would you necessarily want to do that?
It's the 5 years that begs the question. A lot can happen in a 5 year.
Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. And going along with what Councillor Lefebvre said, I mean, one of the things that I've made is a notation down here is as to monitoring. How do we, in fact, ensure that the proper usage of water is occurring? And I think it's an issue of monitoring. How much are the wands, if you will, if I may ask the questions?
Go ahead.
How much are those wands, Mr. Metcalf? I'm not saying we should distribute them, but I'm saying if a person was in a situation of losing water and having a large coverage of 19 customers that he has to service, could he in fact purchase one at a reasonable cost?
Go ahead, Mr. Metcalf, if you can.
I'm just going from memory. I don't know the exact cost of the actual equipment itself, but it does need supporting software to be able to utilize. So often with a leak, it will be visible. You'll see, you'll hear the water running. You'll see your irrigation system running. You'll see puddles. My understanding in this particular case is, given the ground conditions, that it wasn't easily visible.
Which doesn't surprise me in that region. It's very
it's all granular.
Yeah.
And so this is why, as I looked at it, I thought, if how many times in 5 years is appropriate? Is once? Is it twice? I'm not trying to downgrade the significance of this as far as our water use, but in fact, how often does this actually occur? And is it significant to our cash flow and to our water usage? And that's just the question that I would ask of you of passing it on to the appropriate gentleman.
Perhaps, because I'm hearing a lot of questions, perhaps what I might suggest for council to consider is that amending this receipt resolution to essentially ask staff to provide a report back with some of the background and details of how these issues are managed, and then you'd be in a better position to make a decision as an option. Go ahead, Councillor Lefebvre.
One other question that I have for staff is that where does the 5 year, what's the justification for 5 years? Where did that come from? I know it's a city policy, but Why 5 years? And is that a reasonable amount of time, or could that be changed in terms of the existing policy? In the report, I would agree with you, Your Worship, if that's what the majority of council want to do, is to go back to staff for a report before we deal with this situation. That's definitely, we need an answer to that question.
Do you want to move an amendment?
I'll move the amendment, Your Worship. Can we do that?
Go ahead, Thomas.
Your Worship, you don't really need an amendment. You can receive the report and then arising out of pass a motion to direct staff to prepare the report.
A second motion?
Yeah.
Why not just receive it and direct back to staff as one motion?
Sure, but that's not an amendment.
But then I don't get any practice as making amendments.
Whatever way you wish to do it.
All right. Did you want to move an amendment?
Yes, Your Worship, I will do that.
Do we have a seconder for the amendment? All right, so it was Councillor Greer as the seconder. So just on the amendment, is there any discussion? And that's to report, send it back to staff and have a report come forward with all the details. Okay, no discussion on the amendment. I'll call it. All in favor of the amendment? Opposed? Carried. So now on the main motion as amended, which is receipt and back to staff. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. All right, moving on to our reports section, ladies and gentlemen. And our first report is from Mr. Metcalf. And could you give us the background regarding the 2014 special event application, Brant in the Bay?
Thank you, Your Worship. This report introduces for Council's consideration a special event application from Nature Trust of BC to hold their annual Brant in the Bay Festival on Sunday, March the 2nd from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. They'll be setting up a series of watching scopes and a few small tents along the beachfront to view the Brant geese. This event has been run successfully in the past, and staff's recommendation is as per the report.
All right, very good. So, Council, you have a recommendation moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Neufeld. Any discussion on that? Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just further to the Brant Festival coming up, I believe tomorrow you will be engaging in some TV recording along with Miss Lucy the Brant Goosey. Can you share that in case anybody wants to watch it on TV?
Well, yeah. Thank you. I'll be keeping my distance from Miss Goosey, but nonetheless. Yeah, that's one of the promotions that are going to be coming forward in support of this now well-established festival, and I think rather well known, and that's with Gordy, of course, at Czech. So I can't tell you when that will air, but I expect that it's probably one of those Why I Love This Island segments, and I think it's very, very positive. And also, just on the subject of this, they're really moving it forward a little bit this year, and that's to take advantage of, it's that time again, folks, the herring spawn. So, and that's always a very exciting time, obviously, when that happens. And so a lot of discussion has been around how can we continue to make this festival bigger, better, longer, and really help bridge that sort of shoulder season as we head into the busier tourist season. All right, so no further questions, comments? All right, all in favor of the motion? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. Moving on, this time to our Director of Community Planning, Mr. Russell, and give us the background regarding the consideration of a development permit application to facilitate facade upgrades, building addition, drive-through and landscaping improvements, and a temporary building at the Tim Hortons 494 Island Highway East.
If I may, Your Worship, so we have a development permit application for an addition, facade upgrade, as well as a drive-through reconfiguration at the Tim Hortons site. The proposal is located primarily within commercial and mixed-use development permit area number 3. There's a small 5-meter deep strip of land at the back that is within development permit area number 16. So on the projector we can see the proposed site. I'm just going to put it into slide mode if I can. This just shows the overall site. Basically the proposal is to build an addition on this way, as well as to redo the facade exterior of the building, build a freezer unit in the back, and then the drive-through is basically proposed to be lengthened to improve vehicle stacking capability, as well as twinned for this section here, again to alleviate some of the vehicle stacking issues on the site. So this is what the current site looks like. It's already fairly well landscaped. Another shot of it. You can kind of see the current vehicles on the site. So these show the elevation changes to the property. This is kind of the addition section. Here at the back, elevation plans. During the construction of the project, the proponent is proposing a temporary building that will be located at the front of the property while the renovations occur. The development permit will also authorize approval of the temporary building. These are the landscaping improvements. So right here is basically the line where the current parking lot ends. It's being expanded onto an adjacent property where there is a long-term lease in place. There's a landscape buffer at the back here, and this just shows the rerouting, twinning lanes. The 5-meter area is approximately where this landscaping is, plus maybe about a meter of the drive-through. And these are just some of the furnishing details of the site.
All right, very good. Before we get into the recommendation, any questions of our planner from council? Go ahead, Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. First, a comment. I'd just like to say how into their work our staff is, that our committee planner is even dressed in the same colors as the proposed form and character scheme of the changes for Tim Hortons. My question through you, Your Worship, to Mr. Russell, with this improvement in the drive-through, is it anticipated that the drive-through traffic will be sped up a little bit, thus possibly eliminating some of the emissions as a result of idling cars?
If I may, Worship, through to Councillor Powell-Davidson, there should be a reduction in waiting times because they will have 2 menu order boards, which should increase the flow through. So yes, I anticipate there would be less idle time.
Go ahead, Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. I spent an hour or so down at Tim Hortons yesterday having a tea and looking over the property, and I was fascinated because, in fact, I think this will be a really good addition. And I have 2 questions as far as caveats are concerned. And Mr. Russell, if you could, through you, Your Worship, there is a 5-meter groundwater protection area now at the present time between the present land location where Tim Hortons sits and the lot behind. Is that correct? Or where exactly is that? Because in fact, I thought it was right behind it was between the 2 lots.
I can probably illustrate it a little better if I can get the plan here. So, no, it's right now the property line ends right here, and there's right now a landscaping strip, basically where my mouse is kind of moving back and forth.
Okay, that's the landscaping strip. That's what I assumed was the groundwater protection, is it not?
No, it's actually back here where the new landscaping strip is being proposed.
That was not clear on the data, and that's what I was concerned about. What I was concerned about is if we pave that over, what was the impact going to be as far as the groundwater protection? But you're saying there will be no impact at all.
The impacts will be absolutely minimal. The purpose of the groundwater protection in the light industrial area was really related to industrial uses, and this is not an industrial use. But in addition to that, there's basically this landscape buffer. It comprised pretty much most of it.
Thank you. There was one further question. As far as the footprint is concerned, the FAR, I would expect, and Mr. Main is here in the audience tonight. All of this would not, all of the additions would not fit on the present footprint of the present area of that lot, and therefore to accommodate the FAR, the additional take-up from the lot behind is required. Is that I'm asking the question. I don't know.
As far as the floor area ratio of the building and the parcel coverage of the building, it's satisfied on the existing parcel. The additional land is really to facilitate rerouting and lengthening of the drive-through, as well as a reorganization of the parking. The addition basically, if we look back, if I bring up the temporary building plan, if I can find it. Okay. On this plan here, there's basically a length of parking. It's going to be, their building addition is going to go right here where my mouse is moving. As part of that, they're putting additional parking towards the rear here, as well as lengthening the drive-through lane around. So it's primarily to facilitate the drive-through lengthening, as well as to retain and actually slightly increase the amount of parking that's available on the site.
Thank you. I think that this is really a worthwhile project, and I really like the fact that two washroom facilities for accessible washrooms for wheelchairs and this type of thing are included in it, and the fact that there's going to be an increase of about 2/3 the seating capacity, so you can actually get in there and sit down. Thank you.
All right. Well, to that end, did you have a question of the plan? Okay, go ahead, Councillor Fay.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to the Director of Planning. I gather this maxes out the property. That there could there be any future optimization of the property, other than putting a second story on the building?
If I may, Worship, through to Councillor Lefebvre, I don't believe they've maxed out the maximum building area that they could build, and they actually have parking that is double the requirement. So there is some flexibility that the site could be reconfigured a little bit in the future, but what that is, I don't know.
All right, so we have no more questions regarding the presentation. We need a mover and a seconder. I see Councillor Greer moving the recommendation, which in effect receives the report, issues a development permit, and then secures the required securities. Seconded by Councillor Lefebvre, and further discussion on the now motion. All right, this is a good, positive project, a great way to move forward. So all in favor, opposed, and that's carried unanimously. Thank you. You're like a traveling salesman almost with all those samples there. All right, Mr. Russell, moving on to item C, and this is a report and background regarding the consideration of a development permit, 1485 Huntley Road.
If I may, Worship, so we have a development permit application at Huntley Road at 185 Huntley. It's located within the Industrial Park Development Permit Area number 6, as well as it's also located in the Groundwater Protection Development Permit Area number 16. In this case, the applicant is proposing to just do facade upgrades to the exterior of the existing building, as well as some mending of an existing fence. So it's basically a prettying up of the exterior of the building. So I'm just going to quickly kind of show the site here. An aerial view. So it's basically these buildings here where my mouse is moving, this building, and this building. So this is the existing kind of view as you, this is Huntley Road right here. This is part of, some of it's hidden by the trees along the highway section. And then this is at the back on Industrial Way. Sort of an elevation plan. Here's the site again. This just sort of shows you the unit layout of the property. So what we see here, these are the elevations that are proposed. I'm going to show you a comparison that the project architect did for the site. This is sort of a 3D rendering of the facade changes. And this kind of shows you, so here's the existing building, here's the revised building. Again, here's the existing fascia on Huntley. Here's a revised design. And this is, again, back on Industrial Way. So they've really kind of made it a much more kind of exciting, sort of vibrant kind of look over the existing site to kind of an update to the exterior of the premises. That's pretty much what the changes entail. There is a material, if people are wondering why I keep moving up to the front, there is a materials board that just shows the material. So it consists of some corrugated metals and wood and some colors.
All right, thank you for that. Are there any questions of Mr. Russell at the moment? To go ahead, Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't actually have a question. I just I know I've said this a lot lately, and I'm never going to get sick of saying it, but I'm really, really pleased to see property owners taking charge and making these improvements and these upgrades to their buildings in Parksville. And this is in the industrial zone, as you know, so it's, you know, even in our industrial zone, to make it as beautiful as this is, and to make the different separations for the businesses that will be housed there or are housed there. So I'm really pleased to see this coming forward.
All right, thank you for that. Question for Mr. Russell. Go ahead, Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Your Worship. Kudos on the facade. My colleague, Councillor Powell-Davidson, I agree, and it's a great project, and I have no problem with the project, but I got in contact with the Director of Planning earlier today with regards to the accessibility evaluation, and I gather there is one submitted, but it was non-applicable throughout the report. And I'm just wondering that if these facilities are accessible, especially with people who have either ambulatory problems or whatever the case may be, and it won't, I'll approve the project, but if it's for their customers and for future customers, it would be interesting to find. I don't know if the proponents are here this evening, but it would be interesting to find out if some of these facilities are accessible.
Mr. Russell?
If I may, Worship, in this case, they're really subject to the building code that was in place when the building was enacted. They're not doing any structural changes to the building, so they wouldn't trigger any current code conditions. I can say that the driveway is basically flat. There's no real curbs up to the doors, so someone, provided the doorway is sufficient, would not have accessibility challenges, at least from the exterior of the site to the interior.
All right, thank you. Is anyone prepared to move the recommendation before you? Moved by Councillor Morrison, seconded by Councillor Greer, and that is in effect to receive the report and to issue the development permit for the facade improvements. Further discussion? I just wanted to say that, that particular spot in our industrial park has a lot of exposure to the Island Highway as you drive past. There isn't a lot of screening there at all, and so that's fantastic to see that kind of an improvement there, and I think it really sort of sets a better feel, or potentially will set a better feel once it's done. So you can be probably rest assured I'll be supporting it. So with any further comments, go ahead, Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question. So with facade upgrades and things like this, there is no DCC incurrence because they aren't affecting nothing would change in effect, right?
That's correct. No. All right, no further ado then. I don't see any other hands in the air. All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. All right, Mr. Russell, it seems you're the star of our meeting this evening. Let's move on, and this is in regard to the consideration of an application for a permanent change to the food primary liquor license for Tinamera Seaside Resort and Conference Center. Yes, that's right. You have something to state, Councillor Powell-Davidson?
Yes, Your Worship. Due to the fact in my other job, as an event planner, I sometimes work on contract for Tinamera, so I would like to declare conflict of interest and leave the room for this item.
All right, very good. So let the record reflect that Councillor Powell-Davidson declared a conflict and left the room at 7:04, and we will secure you once the deliberations have concluded.
So if I may, sorry.
All right, I think we're good now. Go ahead, Mr. Russell.
Sorry, my bad. So we have before us an amendment to a liquor license application. This is for a food primary license, and any time a food primary license has an entertainment component, there's a requirement that the Liquor Control and Licensing Branch approve that change, and as part of their process, they require local government input. There's basically 4 options for council this evening. Council can provide a resolution that they have no objection to the proposal. Council can provide a resolution looking for community input on the proposal, and then at a subsequent meeting, Council could pass a resolution. Council could pass a resolution that it objects to the proposed permanent change to license. Council can also provide no comment to the Liquor Control and Licensing Branch, which again requires a formal resolution. Basically, the Liquor Control and Licensing Branch, if Council did choose no comment, would then basically undertake their own public consultation process. In this case, the proponent is proposing to allow for music in association with like weddings or other special events within their banquet facilities. This would be in the form of either live music or DJ'd music. And to basically have that as part of their food primary liquor license, they need this entertainment endorsement.
All right, thank you, Mr. Russell. So all of the entertainment, in effect, is occurring inside the various facilities, the different rooms, etc., correct?
That is correct. They're within the banquet facilities.
And I noted in your report that you really saw this as a neutral application, meaning that it likely wouldn't impact anyone, really. And not to put words in your mouth, of course.
There's no residential properties in direct vicinity.
Right.
I believe there have been, not necessarily with music or entertainment, but there, it is a setup as a resort for banquet type facilities.
And you did indicate that an option for council, should council choose to do so, is to simply endorse this application and say that we have no objection to it. Is that correct?
That is certainly an option for council if council so chooses.
But it's not your recommendation?
It's not my recommendation for the simple fact that I'm not omnipotent, so I don't know, while I don't believe there would be any concerns, I can't guarantee that.
I guess the only reason I ask that is if, say, council were to bring back a resolution that simply says, you know what, we have no objection to this whatsoever, would that potentially trigger the Liquor Control Board to still want to do a, maybe they wouldn't be satisfied with that, still want to do a residential sort of survey or whatever?
I believe the Liquor Control and Licensing Branch would certainly weigh council's opinion on it, and it would. I can't really speak for the LCLB. They would, at their discretion, be able to choose to either issue the change in license directly, if they felt it was, it'd really be at their discretion ultimately. I can't guarantee one way or the other. Certainly in the report rationalizes, that council has considered the noise impact potential of the site, so it certainly is an option if council so chooses to do it without the consultation.
All right, well, I'll leave it to your discretion, but as the report suggests, this is about as benign an application as you can get, and we do have a local business that's invested considerably in improving the facilities there, and I think that bodes well for everyone. Councillor Lefebvre had his hand up first. Councillor Greer, go ahead, Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I tend to agree with your comments. I guess the only question I have is that what about the owners of the different facilities within the area of Tanamera? Would that count as a potential objection to noise?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Lefebvre, my understanding of the Liquor Control and Licensing Branch is they basically look at potential impacts on neighbors, and neighbors include adjacent businesses.
Councillor Greer.
I have no trouble with this at all, and I would move that we go forward with it.
All right, so you would essentially move that the city would endorse this application.
That's right.
And indicate to the Liquor Control and Licensing Branch that we take no issue with it. All right, so that's a motion that's on the floor. I need a seconder, moved by Councillor Neufeld, or rather seconded, sorry. So discussion on that motion. Ms. Comas, this is appropriate? All right, very good. So further discussion, okay, I see the seconder first, and then I'll see you, Councillor Lefebvre. Go ahead, Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. I think this council and municipality actually have attended a couple of functions there where music has been used as entertainment. I know that I was here once in December, for that matter, and it was quite enjoyable. It was not noisy. They do control the volume. And I think that there were competing organizations holding dinner dances that evening, for that matter, none of which could be heard. It was all quite segregated. I think that, as Councillor Greer has suggested, it is appropriate to go forward with this with a very positive approach, and that Tanamera has been exemplary in their conduct in the past. I see no reason for anything other than a positive response to their requirements. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Did you have anything further to add, Councillor Lefebvre?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I tend to agree with my colleagues, but I'm just wondering about the condo owners who are near the main building, and what happens to the process if some of the condo owners objected and advised the Liquor Control Board? Would that bring it back could that force it back for consultation?
Go ahead, Mr. Russell.
If Worship, if Council passes a resolution of support without public consultation, it would really be at the Liquor Control and Licensing Branch's discretion whether they wish to conduct further consultation. And no, it would not bounce back to City Council after that.
And that was kind of the premise of my question earlier. But I honestly, I mean, this is pretty benign. It really is. It's all inside. All right, seeing no further comments, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. And if you wouldn't mind getting Councillor Powell-Davidson. Thank you, Al. All right, just give you a moment to get settled. Okay, so I'm actually going to ask you, Mr. Figueroa, if you could just give us the background here. And, of course, we're moving on to item E, which is Development Cost Charges Bylaw number 1437 Amendment.
If I may, Your Worship, before Council is a report from the Director of Engineering and the Manager of Budgets and Special Projects requesting Council authorization for staff to amend the Development Cost Charges Bylaw 2008 number 1437.1 and forward to the February 3rd Council meeting for second and third reading. Staff recommendation is as per the report. However, we do have 6 options for Council's consideration. We would like to start off with a presentation from the Manager of Budgets and Special Projects. And then we'll continue on from there.
All yours.
Thank you, Your Worship, Council members. Thank you for coming to our Development Cost Charge Information session. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to provide information regarding the DCC update and the proposed program. So far in the process, on July 17th, we had a general information session. Between July 18th and December, we used that period to look at the input and the question sessions from specific groups. We had meetings and dialogues with other interested groups, and we also did a technical review of the input and revisions during the period. On December 10th, we met with the Oceanside Development and Construction Association to go over the changes that we have made and again to take in what input they have to give, and feedback to give back to us. And on January 14th, which was just last week, we met with the Parksville and District Chamber of Commerce to again show them the options and get some feedback from them. So tonight, January 20th, we're bringing our findings here to the Council meeting. And then from this, we hope for bylaw consideration, then forward on to ministerial approval, and then back to us for bylaw adoption by Council. So I'll go through briefly the DCC amendment adjustments that have been made since the last time we brought the DCC program to Council. So in the bylaw itself, we are going to amend section 6A, subsection 3 to read, a building permit for any new floor area which has construction value in excess of $100,000. That means there will be no DCC charges on anything there, up to $100,000. Now for all the funds, that's the general fund, the water fund, and the sewer fund, we adjusted the gradient density to include medium and high density structures in the rate calculations for the DCCs. We also went through and reviewed all the projects, reviewed the current cost estimates of those projects, and the DCC eligibility of those projects in accordance with the Development Cost Charges Best Practices Guide. So that was for all the categories, the roads, the parks, the sewer, sanitary sewer, storm drainage, and water utility fund. So in the general fund, the open spaces or parkland, we reduced the parkland acquisition costs for parkland from $1 million to $300,000 in the years 2020, 2025, and 2030. For the roads and the storm sewer categories, we adjusted the worksheets to include all the 2013 DCC projects that will be incomplete at the end of 2013. And based on that, we then adjusted the reserve balances to include the unused amounts for the 2013 incomplete. So it gave us a better starting point of where our reserves would be going forward into 2014. In the roads category, we deleted 4 of the projects that were there. They are listed there, and the amounts and the years that they were listed in. We adjusted some DCC components of another 4. For Despard Highway 4A to Craig, we dropped the DCC portion from 100% to 67%. For the Hearst Avenue project, it went from 76% to 50%. For the Highway 19 project, from 100% to 50%. And for the Highway 4 project, from 100% to 67%. In the storm sewer category, again, we adjusted cost estimates on the 4. The one in the bottom, Moss Avenue, we also adjusted the DCC component. Now that looks like a big jump from 9% to 50%, but the scope of Moss Avenue changed totally. So now we're only looking at the DCC portion of that, which is the $57,000. Whereas before, when it was $328,000, we had a big proportion of non-DCC, and the DCC factor took that into consideration. And then we removed 3 projects, again, mostly 2019 and 2020 for various amounts. So that was all the projects that we changed under the general fund. So looking at this, based on those changes that we made, you can see the changes to the roads, the storm, and the open spaces. So with these changes, we're proposing for single-family dwellings under the roads category, it moves up to $38.96 from the current $37.99, and that's an increase of $96.02 for this category. In the storm category, for the single-family dwelling cost, it moves to $503.96 from the current $1,383, which is a reduction of $879. And then the open spaces also reduces. It goes from the $1911, which it is currently now, to $332.91, which is a reduction of over $1,500. So that is the impact of the changes that we have made in the general fund. I'm going to go on to the sewer fund right now, just for a little bit of consistency, because there's more to talk about with the water fund. So just to be consistent, and there was fewer changes in the sewer fund, we'll go directly to the sewer fund. And again, we adjusted the worksheet to include any 2013 projects that were incomplete at the end of 2013, and adjusted the reserve balances to reflect that. We just adjusted the DCC component on the Hearst Avenue project, went from 100% to 20%. And we also adjusted the cost on that project from $318,000 to $310,000. So the impact from that basically was we're projecting a single-family residential costing of $101.79 from the current one of $381, which is a reduction of $279.70. So for those 4 categories, the only one that's actually increased is the roads, and it's increased by less than $100. So now we'll look at the water fund. And again, in the water, we adjusted the worksheet to include the incomplete projects and also the reserve balances to reflect the unused amounts. We adjusted the DCC component for the river intake project. It went from 100% DCC to 75% DCC. We adjusted the cost estimates for 2 of the Highway 19A programs and a Highway 4A program. Some went up, some went down. And then we also adjusted the funding sources. We have an additional $133,000 of developer contributions towards Springwood Well that we could apply to the project, which again would decrease any DCC funding required on that project. We removed certain projects: Skaichen to Sunray, Stanford Avenue, Shelley to Martindale, Highway 4A to Cypress, Despard to Maple Crescent, and Soriel to Chinook. And all of those projects that we removed were 100% DCC projects. Other adjustments that we made in the water fund: we researched several options for reducing the DCC rates, which included potential of grant funding and borrowing amounts. We adjusted the percentage of borrowing between the city share and the DCC, the development community share, to maintain positive balances in the accumulated reserve fund and the DCC reserve fund. We also adjusted water rates in order to try to get a nice balance to maintain the reserves as well. So based on that, we came up with 6 options for council. So option 1 sees a municipal assist factor of 1%. No grants are included in this. We show a borrowing amount of $18 million and water increases of 5%, 3%, and 2%. The proposed single-family dwelling DCC rate under this option would be $17,556, which is an increase of 21.3% over the existing DCC for the water single-family dwelling. Option 2, again, has a municipal assist factor of 1%, but it includes a $2 million grant funding. We've decreased the borrowing amount to $15,700,000, and water increases are 5%, 3%, and 2%. And then in the last 2 years of the financial plan, there would be no water increases. The single-family dwelling DCC rate for this option is $16,835, which is an increase of 16.32% over the current rate. Option 3, again, a municipal assist factor of $1 million, potential grants of $4 million, a borrowing of $13.8 million, with water rate increases of 4% in the first year, 2% in the following 2 years, and then just status quo for the following 2 years of the financial plan. The rate on this one for a single-family dwelling would be $16,028, which is an increase of 10.74% over the current rate. Option 4, again, municipal assist factor of 1%, increase the potential grant amount by $2 million to a total of $6 million. We've decreased the borrowing amount to $12 million, and the rate increases are 4%, 2%, and 1%. The DCC rate for the single-family dwelling in this option is $15,285, which is an increase of 5.61% over the current rate. And the last option is option 5, which again is a municipal assist factor of 1%. In this model, there's a potential grant built in of $8 million, and the borrowing amount is $9,850,000. Water increases is 4% and 2%, and again, status quo in the last 2 years of the financial plan. The DCC rate for this one is $14,490, which is an increase of 0.12% over the current DCC rate. So what does that look like in regards to our current rates? So under option 1, we actually see an increase of $5,724 because our rate would jump up to $12,721. Under option 2, we have an increase of $5,003 because our rate jumps up to $12,000. Under option 3, we have an increase of $4,195 based on a new rate of $11,190. Under option 4, we have an increase of $3,453 based on a proposed rate of $10,450. And option 5 would see an increase of $2,658 and a single-family dwelling rate of $9,655.33. So just to summarize, the rates for options 1 to 5, under option 1, there is no grant amount monies included, and the borrowing is $18 million, and the total is $17,556. Under option 2, the total that is of all the 5 categories. Okay. Under option 2, we have a grant money of $2 million with borrowing of 15.7, and the total for 5 categories is $16,835. Option 3 is $4 million with 13.8 million borrowing for a total of $16,028. Under option 4, $6 million with $12.35 million in borrowing, coming out at $15,285. And the 5th one is $8 million at $9,850 in borrowing for a total of $14,490. So those were all the options presented to Council. Staff is recommending option 3, which is $4 million in borrowing. And based on option 3, this is what the changes would look like based on all 5 categories. So the total single-family dwelling would be $16,027.77, which is an increase of $1,554.33 over the current rate. Thank you very much. Any questions?
All right, thank you, Pamela. Yeah, as always, questions. So I will open the floor to members of council if you have any questions regarding this presentation. Go ahead, Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. In regards to the water intake, because it's being moved, we're moving that upstream to facilitate the move mandated by VHA. I'm wondering how much of that, and I appreciate the fact that it's been dropped to 75% from 100% already. How much of that is actually borne on new construction? I realize we're putting in a larger pipe. Is that the basis of the extra costs that are involved there? I'm just wondering whether 75 and 25 is reasonable, or should be more of a 50-50 split.
Mr. Figueroa, did you want to answer that, please?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Morrison. The logic with the 75-25 was that the current intake for the City of Parksville has a capacity of about 12 megaliters, and the current citizens are responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of that one, have been for a very long time. With the movement to the new location, we are building a 48 megaliter intake, and the reason 48 megaliter intake is beyond the 20-year horizon. Basically, we want to build a 48 megaliter intake to ensure that future development is possible in Parksville. When we go into the river, we don't want to go in 20 years and upgrade the intake, rip up the stream again. We want to be able to, it's a similar thought process to a dam. When you go to build a dam, you don't build a 20-year dam. You build for the future, to allow future growth. So the new intake is 48. The existing citizens are responsible for 12. It's a 25-75 split. There are other reasons why we would do that now. Certainly building it now is cheaper. You go to build the additional capacity on the intake in the future, irregardless of the environmental issues, it's going to cost you more money. We're using today's dollars to build that. Some other issues. In the future, if we were to have to increase the capacity of the intake, 100% of the cost would be on development to do that. There's many factors like that went into it.
Follow-up, Councillor Morrison?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just a quick follow-up. Is there I mean, obviously you're putting in a larger pipe. Is there different facilities that are required now that you're putting in a larger intake, or is it just the difference between the large and small pipe that we're talking about? I realize, I mean, it obviously makes sense to put in the larger infrastructure now to prepare for the facility as upgrade. Is there that much of a difference between the two pipe sizes? Is that the difference between the two costs? What should be borne by the developer, or is it the entire moving of that intake?
If I may, Your Worship.
Yeah, go ahead.
Councillor Morrison. That is one aspect of it. I mean, one aspect of it is we need to mobilize to build the 12 megaliter intake. We need a certain size for the 12 megaliter intake. To upgrade it to 48, yeah, it's basically you're increasing the pipe sizes, you're increasing the size of the actual intake structure down on the river. We didn't think that it was appropriate just to look at the cost issue alone there. There are several other reasons why. Another reason was theoretically the existing intakes of 12 megaliter intake. That would take us quite a bit far down the road in terms of the supply. Theoretically, the existing intake could be used, and the treatment plant could be built to withdraw from the existing intake location. There are other reasons why we're moving it up, but that's another factor in the decision for the 75-25. I mean, theoretically, the existing citizens could be responsible for that intake, and it can be used along with the treatment plant. We could comply with the treatment with that existing intake, but then there's no option to grow.
Good. All right, go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you.
Next?
Thank you, Your
Councillor
Worship. On the same subject, I was just wondering, I realize that you're building for the future, but you're really only charging the development community the extra DCCs for that. The community, the present residents are paying no more than they ever paid. Is that right? So they're not taking part in the additional volume that we're looking forward in the future. They are just simply paying exactly what they're paying now at the 12%, and they're not really paying it forward for the development that we expect. So most of the onuses at 75 to 25 is on the DCCs.
For me, Your Worship, yes,
go ahead.
It is correct. The 75% is put towards DCCs, so 25 would be the existing. 75% is towards DCCs.
Yeah. But my question is that presently they're paying 12, and with the increased flow and so on, increased size of pipe, they're still only paying the 12. So the DCCs, you're charging the developers 75% against the 25 because they still are paying the 25. They're not paying anything more for the increase. The
current citizens are responsible to maintain that 12 megaliter per day capacity required to service their needs.
That's
Any
right.
capacity beyond that, such as this 48 megaliter intake, 3/4 of which is really ultimately being designed to accommodate growth in the future.
I realize that, but shouldn't the residents pay towards that as well?
If there isn't sufficient development and sufficient DCCs, the residents will be paying towards that. Absolutely.
But it seems to me it's an unfair percentage at this particular time, because I think we're all in this together, whether we're presently residents or whether we're newcomers coming in. We're building for the future in general, so I think the present residents have to pay a percentage of that as well.
You could accommodate that very easily if you wanted to change the municipal assist factor as a general sort of assistance by the residents toward the development community, if indeed you believe in that philosophical position. But I think your point being that ultimately if we were to, say, not expect any further growth in the community, we could go with the existing intake. We could site a half the size treatment plant on that site at that location in all likelihood, because we have land base there, and carry on merrily on our way. If we are obviously expecting some degree of growth, and based on our projections, this is why we're moving forward with the new water treatment center in the capacities that it is designed to ultimately fulfill in order to accommodate that growth and development that is expected over the next 25 plus years, hence the 75% charge, since of course development cost charges are only growth related, correct, Mr. Figueroa? Okay. On that subject, and then I'll go to you, Councillor Lefebvre, because you'll notice in that report, ladies and gentlemen, the one tremendous variable is that grant, and how much will that grant be? You saw some of the concern at the beginning of the meeting from both sides of the spectrum as to where council will try to estimate or determine where that grant will be. Let me just give a quick update on what's going on around securing those funds. I did meet last week, ladies and gentlemen, with both our Member of Parliament, Dr. James Lunny, as well as our MLA. At the same time, along with our Manager of Water Services, Mr. Squire, and spent quite a considerable amount of time with them, first here in the building, going over the actual project again. They have had briefings in the past, but it's good to keep them up to date on where exactly we're at. Also talked very much about and provided very much the same materials you're hearing today about DCCs and the associated impacts in that regard as well, and expressed as strongly as we could express to both of our partners, both the province and the federal government through their representatives, that it's vitally important they come to the table and provide the most grant funding possible, because not only is it for the betterment of our own future here and absolutely necessary, it reduces obviously the borrowing that's required. We still need to win a referendum in order to borrow those funds. And we were really trying to make the point that there's an economic impact as well if there's a lack of that grant. We can't predict how much we're going to get. Obviously, we will seek out what we have always sought out, which is 2/3 funding. Is it realistic to expect that? Absolutely not. It's anecdotal, but I know the water treatment plant in Nanaimo, which is a $70 million project, did receive $17.8 million in a combination federal-provincial grant. So you can sort of extrapolate from that, but that's just one example. The advice we got back on the federal side is that likely we want to be ready in spring to put our submission in. That's the intake period, and then it would probably be closer to fall before we actually have an answer as to what we might expect by way of a grant. But do understand that we are working on this very hard. We're staying in very close contact, and we're applying diplomatic pressure to the greatest extent we can, ensuring that both other orders of government, or rather the two senior orders of government, understand this importance of this issue. And I have assurances from both the MP and the MLA that we will all work together to do the very best job we can to deliver to our constituents collectively the best possible amount of granting that we can get. Now, sorry, go ahead, Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Worship. I have two questions through you. First of all, well, I think both questions to Pam. Did you look at other scenarios regarding increasing the municipal assist factor?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Lefebvre, we did initially look at one option with no grant money and increasing the municipal assist factor in order to actually try to equate to the level the DCC rate is at now, and with that option it would require a 20% increase in the municipal assist factor, so we'd have to raise it to 20%.
Thank you. My second question, through you again, Your Worship, to Pam. There's no right answer. In your financial summary on page 83, each option presents a financial risk of some degree. So whatever option is selected this evening is simply there, and depending on what the grant is, things will have to be, assuming that whatever option is accepted, assuming that we don't get, or we get more, or we get less, we've got to come back to the table and put out and go with another option when we know that amount of money. That's pretty much the way it would go?
That's correct, and that's why we kind of try to err on the side of conservatism, because it's easier to come back with a lower DCC amendment than a higher one later on.
Go ahead. Who is first? Councillor Neufeld, then Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Pam, I appreciate what you've put up. Some of it was somewhat surprising to me. Back on July 3rd, we wound up getting a presentation by you that came in at 45% as far as an increase in the DCCs. Since then, there have been a tremendous number of amendment adjustments and rationale, and I haven't seen those figures before. I've not been party to that. But I actually would like to be able to go over and spend some time with those figures. Do you have them up as far as hard copy is concerned? And could you, in fact, spend some time with me or with the rest of council for that matter? Because I have some serious questions with respect to that. And I can't delineate what they would be right now, but there are a whole set of assumptions that I'm not comfortable with in looking at what you've come up with. There are many... any number of projects that have been slashed, put off, and yet if we're going to have growth, we're going to need money to be able to put some of those things in place, such as Despard, things of that nature. And I would like to know the basis on which those assumptions were made. Could you possibly provide that to me, or to provide that to the council for that matter?
So let me just stop right there for a second. It's not just yourself. Everyone around the table has not had opportunity to see the specific report. Those that were directly involved, including our liaison, I suspect may have more information than we have with the ODCA, for instance. I was going to suggest after our discussion here, since we're not necessarily in a panic, that we may want to refer this to our next meeting to provide an opportunity for members of council to digest some of these information. There's nothing that is compelling us to have to give a reading tonight. In fact, in the report, it even suggests you might want to consider taking more input as well. So it's not that I want to put off ever making a decision, but to some of the points you made and others, there are some new wrinkles here that perhaps council might benefit from having opportunity to sit with staff and talk with them and pose questions, etc. But I'll leave that. Obviously, it's council's discretion what motion gets passed.
If I could continue?
Yeah.
And Your Worship, I think that obviously one of the participants in the gallery, Mr. Round, would like to have a look at some of the data as well. So I think that there are people that are concerned, would like to know what those adjustments are and the rationale for them. And I'd like to know how we move from 45% down to possibly 1%. Really quite significant. And the point is taken as far as Councillor Greer is concerned. Hopefully the present residents will be paying their fair share of the amount of money that will be expended as far as the developments that do occur. But in fact, I'm still concerned that the development, the Oceanside development agencies contribute their fair share as well, and that's what my thesis is. And if we go to a vote tonight, I'm going to be looking somewhat skewed. I can't vote for any of this material at this time. Thank you.
Okay, further comments? You had your hand up, Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for all the work that you've done, Pam, and the rest of staff. Two quick questions. First of all, I understand staff kind of looking at option number 3 as in an endeavor to err on the side of caution. However, I'm a firm believer that if you want something, you reach for it. And I'm concerned that if we only put out there that we want to borrow, say, $4 million, the powers that be might view that and think, well, they only need $4 million. I'm kind of leaning towards, looking at, not borrowing, I beg your pardon, wrong choice of word, grant funding. I'm kind of leaning towards putting it in there that that we need to rely on higher grant funding. I mean,
just
that
for
would
your
be my
information,
concern.
Councillor Powell-Davidson, in those discussions, which we ultimately actually went to the ASR site and looked at all of that, I provided them essentially the very same kind of a worksheet, but it went up to 15 million. Right? I didn't say that we were expecting any amount, just that there you go. You know, if we were to get to that level, that would be very beneficial for us, obviously. So I don't know how much it would sway one way or another. Really, it goes to Infrastructure Canada. They really look at the merits of the project and a number of factors. To the extent that the politicians have a whole lot of sway, well, they may have some, certainly, but I don't know if that particular aspect would send a message to the folks that are actually reviewing our application or not.
Can I have a follow-up, please, Your Worship?
Yeah, please.
I might have missed it, Ms. Lovegrove, but I don't recall hearing anything about the reserves that we saved up towards this water project. Are they factored in here?
Your Honor, through to Councillor Powell-Davidson, yes, the reserves are in there. We did adjust the reserves to for the incomplete 2013 projects where we haven't removed any of the DCC funding from the reserves. In our initial presentation, those amounts were basically considered already spent. But as the year progressed and they weren't in there, then we've moved them back in, so we have updated the reserves, so the reserves are at the maximum level that they could be going into the 2014 year, and to help equate the DCCs.
Further, I think Councillor Morrison beat you, and then Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to note something, and I remiss in my first comment. We also received correspondence from the Parksville Downtown Business Association. They asked me to make mention of that, so it's also noted down in the report. Secondly, the comments that Councillor Powell-Davidson made, I would agree with putting out a motion that we are, council is amenable to a $4 million. By the way, it may seem small here, is I don't know. To me, it has the potential to send a message that we can deal with $4 million, and while it may, like I said, may be small potatoes, it may also have some impact. So if we're at the stage where we can make adjustments one way or the other when the funding does finally come through, I'd rather ask for more than less.
Very good. Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've had this information for some time because I'm the liaison with the ODCA, so I was working with our CAO and with a number of people. And from the beginning, of course, 45% was out of the question. I understand that the city takes a very cautious view of this and are always looking on the side of error. But I think the consequences from doing that, we must look at it more positively. I'm sure that with the money and with the fact that we were forced into this water situation, that we're going to have some money that's going to be beneficial to us. I've always liked option 5 because I don't believe we should be increasing DCCs, because I think it's going to kill any economic development that we might have in this area. We already have people developing outside our borders, such as west of Wembley Mall, and they're using all our facilities, roads, parks, library, etc., and we don't get a dime from them. And as long as our DCCs are higher than anyone else, that'll continue to happen until they run out of land in the RDN. So even though I know the residents always fear that the developers are making all the money, that is not true. It's passed on to the people who come to the city to buy houses. And as you know, we're probably one of the most expensive areas on the island. And for that reason, putting up the DCCs, I think, is a huge mistake. And I think it also shows, as been mentioned, that it sends a bad message to the senior governments, thinking that, yes, they don't need so much money, they're prepared to borrow more money. So I think it's very important In fact, it's vitally important that we don't increase the DCCs at this time. There might be in the near future a reason to do that, but at this time, I really feel that keeping the DCCs where they are, and they're plenty high enough now, considering that the development is going outside our borders. So I certainly wouldn't recommend what the city has recommended, option 3, and I would recommend option 5. But I'd be prepared to leave it until maybe other members of the development community, Chamber of Commerce, et cetera, the business community and the staff sit down and maybe go over it again, because I don't know whether everyone understands exactly where we're at. But it's okay to say this is the money we need in order to make it happen, but I think it'll hurt the city in the long run. Thanks.
Do you want to make this a shorter meeting and actually make a motion to that effect? Would you want to refer it back to?
I would make a motion. I'd be prepared to make a motion that that we go with option 5 rather than option 3.
Do you want to make a motion to actually go with a specific option, or do you want to refer this report
No, I think,
back?
I
you
think,
want to go with an option?
I think this option is fine.
All right. So the motion is essentially option 5. Do we have a seconder on option 5? All right, moved by Councillor Lefebvre, and we'll discuss that now. Go ahead, Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you. Some of my colleagues have made comments earlier that sending a message to the senior levels of government at a lower rate could be a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that's been my concern also. But I want to come back to what this is all about. Councillor Greer referred to the fact that it's being imposed on us by the provincial government, and they're doing that for health reasons. That's the logical thing to do, but nevertheless it's being imposed on us. We provide water. We're required to provide water in the Englishman River, as we heard from Faye Smith and Peter Law earlier this evening, for the fish, because the fish are just as important to senior levels of government, and us, of course, on our level of government too, but it's important. And that in itself has been a challenge, and we've met that challenge because we've succeeded, as we heard this evening, in increasing the quantity of fish in the Englishman River. And going forward, and that is not going to be an easy task. The other thing in here that's very, very important is that we are looking at something that doesn't exist in BC, and that's the aquifer storage and recovery. And the mayor and I attended a conference last November in Richmond, and I can tell you that there are a lot of people in British Columbia, a lot of communities in British Columbia that are looking at what we're doing, because they have the same problem we have: low flow water, cool low flow water in the summertime. I believe, given the due diligence that our staff, excellent staff, have performed in that regard, that we're going to succeed in that effort. And if we do, we will be a template for the rest of the province. All of these things to say that that's worth something. Doesn't exist in BC. There's only one other location in Canada, and I believe we will succeed. When that happens, then we'll become a force to show others how to do it and how it's done. Some of the machinations and some of the pitfalls that we've fallen into. So that's got to be worth something, and given all of the time and effort that we put into it. We provide water to the Nanoose residents. As part of our good neighbor policy with regard to that, and the AWS structure itself has been a wonderful example of sharing water and sharing costs to provide that water. And this is an attempt to get a long-term supply, a reliable supply of potable water. That is worth from my perspective, putting the senior governments on notice that that's worth a lot of money. And I would support option 5. I do support option 5 because of all of the reasons that I've just mentioned. I want to thank staff for the great job that they've done in bringing this to our attention. But I think now it's time to impress on the senior levels of government what this means for the future of not only Parksville, but for the future of other residents of Oceanside, and the kind of structure that we have, coming back to the issue of the environment and the fish. And if we stick to those points, I think we have a very good case to get more money than is required. And as I said earlier this evening, after getting an answer from Pamela, that if we don't get that money, well then we'll have to adjust anyway. But I think that we shouldn't get caught in a self-fulfilling prophecy. We should send a strong message for all of the reasons that I've mentioned this evening to the senior levels of government that we require this funding.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Greer. And
just one other comment. I would like to also thank Pam and the Finance Department and Lucky for doing a really good job. And I know it's a difficult job, and I know that cities in general err on the side of caution, but it takes maybe business minds to move ahead. Thanks.
Councillor Neufeld, you had your hand up.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. I have a real fundamental philosophy change or disagreement as far as the council is concerned. And I look at one of the things that Frank Leonard from Saanich said is that we need more money. We have to be able to have more money to provide for infrastructure for our communities. We have to look at new revenue sources and more revenue sources. But in fact, we don't even take in all of the revenue sources that might be possible as far as DCCs are concerned. We're in a situation where we have a shortfall with respect to infrastructure, and we're going to be replacing some of that infrastructure, and it's going to be costly. That's something that we will have to bear as far as residents are concerned, but the new infrastructure with respect to roads, sewers, all of those things that go with the development are going to be required as far as the water treatment plant and water intake and that type of thing. I look at the DCCs as being a really significant part of the development of the community. And I think of DCCs, how they've in fact impacted on some major communities that you may laugh at, but in fact Las Vegas was a desert town and didn't have sufficient water, and so they wound up going out and whacking 500% on the DCC. They wound up doing a tremendous increase as far as their development was concerned. And in fact, you should see the state that has occurred there. We look at development areas such as Ontario. They have DCCs that are approximately $42,600 for, in a different jurisdiction, and it includes, general government, library services, fire, police, parks and recreation, public works, roads and water, sewer, all kinds of different things that we're not allowed to obtain monies for here in BC. But in fact, we're going to have to be looking at the cost of those things. We should be getting as much money as far as revenue is concerned from the developers for the development purposes that we can. I'm really aghast that we would go forward without any further discussion of the amendments, the discussion about the rationale, and I cannot support this. I'm sorry, Your Honor. Your Worship.
All right, thank you, Councillor Neufeld. Go ahead, Councillor Lefebvre.
In the bigger scheme of things, if our economy stagnates, and I might use the term, if it continues to be a sort of a flat level at best, no matter what we do, if for whatever reason the construction industry decides that the market isn't there, or the developers decide the market isn't there, one scenario could be, and it wouldn't be a very good scenario, they could refuse to build. They'd say, I'm not going to do that because, and we've had that happen to us. We've got a lot of people that have development permits, and they've done nothing with the property because there's They're looking at other factors in the economy in terms of the marketability at this point in time. So if we take a scenario where the economy stays flat, and it pretty much indicated that that's the way things are going for the time being, for the foreseeable future, and nothing happens, then unfortunately we'll have to pay for what we have. We'll eventually have to make tougher decisions in terms of taxes and in terms of rates and all of that sort of thing, because there won't be any money coming in. So it's the rock and the hard place again, because if you raise DCCs to meet a certain financial goal in terms of what you want to do with the community, and that revenue is not generated, as was shown to us several months ago by the Director of Finance, where our revenues from DCCs was, I don't know, it fell by a significant amount. And with that shortfall has got to be made up if we're going to continue to look after the infrastructure and the things that we want to have in our community. So there's no easy answer. And I think that staff have done a very credible job in sort of outlining what are some of the permutations and combinations depending on what we do. What I see going on here tonight is the fact that we need to bring the senior levels of government to the table and explain to them what we're doing and why we're doing it, and what the impact, not only for the Oceanside area, but what the impact could be, especially with something like the ASR, could be for the province. So it's not an easy situation, and the economy will dictate what will happen. I don't know how many lots we have that are sitting vacant in the community now, where the owners and developers have said, we're not going to build this because we don't think it's not marketable, or we don't like the existing DCCs, or whatever the case may be. But it's this thing with regards to water has to move forward, and that's why I think that we should send a message that we want this money, we need this money, and we can move forward.
All right, thank you for that. Let me just, for a moment, just interject. I just want to clarify exactly with Councillor Greer here, the motion that's before us, because there is on page 84, the original recommendation. In effect, you're saying option 5, right? So you're receiving the report, authorizing staff to amend the cost charge bylaw with option 5 as set out in that report, and that further that development cost charge bylaw then, as amended, be forwarded to the February 3rd, 2014 council meeting, right? Is it important that there be an indication in that resolution of a second and third reading? Because ultimately that's still our decision at that time. I'm looking at you, Mrs. Thomas.
Yes, Your Worship. Before the bylaw, once council amends the bylaw, before it can go forward, it must be read a second and third time, and then it goes off to the province for ministerial approval. So if this report is adopted with option 5 in it, the bylaw will come back for second and third reading at the next council meeting. At that point in time, council can debate it again. If you would like to make another amendment again, at that point in time, you can do that.
Or refer it to various associations? Okay.
You can. But bearing in mind that that does extend the time frame for the adoption.
So I just wanted to clarify that at this point so that everybody's clear that this isn't a final decision, and then ultimately this does at some point go to the province to be reviewed by them and put back to us one final time. To your point, Councillor Lefebvre, and this is something I want to say to everyone in the room, let's not fall into that fool's game of beating each other up over what we think is fair or isn't fair. You pay 10 times the amount of taxes to senior government that you do to your local municipality. So you might want to work with us, and for those of you, whether your residents associations or your business associations, might want to express very politely, because I can tell you both our representatives are on board. They want to do the best job they can for you, but express to them and their colleagues the importance of seeing those dollars, that 10 times the amount you're paying locally, going off to Ottawa and Victoria, that some of those come back at times like this when the future of our city is very much at hand. So let's not get into a fool's game and beat each other up, because we're all in this boat together one way or another. Anyway, carrying on. So that is the motion that's before us. Is there any further discussion on that, or can we move on to another issue and I call the vote? Go ahead, Councillor Neufeld. I'll give you another word on it.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. Just to comment on Councillor Lefebvre's material, we were talking about monies that are available and what we have to have if we have a stagnation in the economy and people don't come and build here and develop here. I mean, if we have a low DCC rate, we bring in all of these people, and we have a great influx, but we don't have sufficient funds to put in place all of the infrastructure. Basically, we have that situation here at the present time. We have streets without sidewalks. We have streets with open gutters. We have streets with inadequate lighting, mainly because DCCs, sufficient DCCs, were not collected. So we're in a situation, are we going to perpetuate that? I mean, that's basically what we're saying, and I can't agree with it. I'm saying we have to put up the DCCs, we have to make them significant, and we have to put them in such a context that they are, although you choose not to use the term, fair. Fair to the present people who live here, fair to the developers that are going to be here, fair to the constructors that build the places for us. But if we don't put them up, we're going to put ourselves into the same situation that we find ourselves in now, of having to go back and retrofit a lot of our infrastructure.
All right, thank you for that. I just want to point out, though, that really DCCs aren't calculated like that. They're based on the cost of DCC applicable projects, and then ultimately it's a municipal assist factor that is really the political decision. No one here is suggesting to change that, anything from what it has always been, which is only 1%, which is the lowest that we're allowed. There's no question, though, lots of communities are having infrastructure issues. It's a result of a variety of different issues, not just a lack of DCC collection. There's been all sorts of rising costs and all sorts of issues that relate to that. I don't think the solution is to stop your economic activity either, because I think when you end up in a community that's got a declining population, you start to lose services and you stop becoming a community. So I think we need to move forward together, work together, and ultimately come up with fair solutions, and I actually think we're pretty damn close. All right, can we carry on, or can we call the vote here? All right, I'm calling it on that motion. All right, Mark has made a promise to Councillor Powell, who's not here this evening, to read a short statement. Go ahead, Councillor
Powell is out of province, and she asked me to read this to her fellow colleagues this evening. Her comments are, I believe that we should pass a bylaw that reflects option 1, but only for 1 year. If we do receive grant money and we know how much we will be receiving from the provincial and federal governments, then we can create a new DCC bylaw that includes the actual amount of money we have. This way, we will not be locked into a 5-year bylaw, and we'll be able to adjust our DCCs accordingly.
All right, very good. And we did actually touch on that at the beginning, and that is, in effect, how it works. And the moment this is actually adopted, there's still a full year before it's implemented, so there is time still. All right, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor, opposed, and that is carried. Thank you. All right, so it is an election year, is it not? Very good.
Well, it certainly is, Your Worship.
Mrs. Comas, will you give us the background regarding the 2014 election procedures report?
Yes, Your Worship. The purpose of this report is to outline proposed processes for the 2014 local government election and obtain authorization for lease of updated vote counting equipment. The two primary updates are to move to a voting book election and to lease new equipment. The equipment currently owned by the city is outdated and no longer supported. By leasing equipment, we ensure we always have up-to-date technology, and technology in the voting world is changing quite rapidly. And we no longer have storage or maintenance to deal with. The voting book election does not use the provincial's voters list and requires every voter to bring 2 pieces of identification to the voting place. It eliminates the voter registration function for those people not on the voters list, and voting book elections are used in a variety of jurisdictions across the province, many of which are much larger than Parksville, and so staff recommendations are as per the council agenda.
So you have a recommendation before you, Council. Do we have a mover and a seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Lefebvre, and I'll open it to discussion. Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick question. This is not the same machine that Al Gore and George Bush got involved with, did they, back in the...
There will be no hanging chads.
And honestly, our folks are more than smart enough to figure out a ballot. Any other questions, comments? Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. And this is a question through you to Ms. Comas, please. The way we're doing it right now costs approximately $1,000. Is that accurate?
The way we're doing which now?
Doing the election.
The counting or the actual registration and...
The counting.
The counting? I'm not...
Well, I'm just looking at, in here, our note, it says that in terms of the financial, under the section on financial, the elimination of provincial voter list is a cost savings to the city from the purchase of the list and the printing of the multiple bound copies. So we got a cost savings there, but it says in 2011 there was $20 plus approximately 20 hours of staff time, and then the last line, the elector packages cost in the neighborhood of $1,000 in staff time. So the existing way that if we take all the calculations in, am I correct in saying the existing way that we do run this election is approximately $1,000 in comparison to renting the new machine, which is upward of $9,000? Is that accurate?
No.
Okay.
The $1,000 that you're talking about is the process that we use when you come to the voting place and you actually register and receive your ballot. That $8,900 is to do with the vote counting equipment. Back in, I think it was 2002, maybe earlier, the city actually made the capital investment to buy voting machines. And those voting machines have been used in subsequent elections, but they are now outdated and no longer supported. You can't get the software from them. So the idea is to move to the new vote counting equipment. But that $8,900 is not just the machines. It's also all the ballots. It's also the training for all of the election day staff. And so there are ancillary services that are included in that quote of $8,900. So it's not a capital investment, it's a lease.
A follow-up then, please?
Sure, but I was just going to ask, so if we just canceled the election, then we would save that $9,000, right? Go ahead with a quick follow-up, and then Councillor Neufeld.
Okay, I'm just trying to get kind of a cost comparison, and if we took into consideration the efficiency, the staff time, the supplies that are needed, the fact that our existing equipment can't be utilized, would there be less of a discrepancy in what I'm seeing here? Would it be a good investment? Would it be definitely worth our while?
Well, from my perspective, it is definitely worth your while. Not both from a financial perspective, from an efficiency perspective. And the thing is to go out and make that capital investment is a lot more than $8,900 if you were going to go forward and purchase equipment. And the whole tenor of voting technology is changing very rapidly right now because there is a movement to bring in internet voting, electronic voting, and they're looking at the legislative changes in BC right now that would allow us to do that. And so coming down the road, future council may choose to participate in some of those new technologies. And if you bought equipment and put out a fairly hefty capital investment, you're going to be in the same situation again where you're going to want to use that same equipment year after year after year, and yet people may be wanting to vote online. They may want, they're talking technology where you could be given a PIN number, vote on your computer at home, receive a QR code on your phone, take your phone to the voting place, and just put it up to the machine, and there goes your ballot, and have the machine read the QR code on your phone. So there's a whole area of technological advancement that we're on the brink of seeing, and BC is looking at changing the legislation to allow us to use it. So, you know, I think we're better off to lease right now and see what comes down the road than to actually make a capital investment. Okay.
Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. One of the things that I read in here is that we would use 2 pieces of identification, and that would be it. I have friends on Coldstream. I have friends in San Periel that swear adamantly that they live in Parksville. You know, I have no idea what their identification would show, Your Worship. You know, how do we? If they have proper identification to show that they live in Parksville, and yet I know that they live in Arrington or live in elsewhere, how do we how do we ensure that there's proper balloting? And I guess I look at that may be a very small percentage, but in many cases they don't know where they live themselves. Yeah, I hate to say it.
Well, you did say they were your friends. So.
They're my friends, yes. Well, but you know, I accept them as my friends, and I get along with them. But how do we, in fact, you know, make sure that we validate who, in fact, is voting in our election?
Okay.
That's what my question is.
Yeah, we have 2 ways of doing that under this system. First of all, when a person would come in with their ID, we have city maps there available where we say, okay, here's the residence. It's in the boundary of Parksville. Okay, so that's the first hurdle. The second one is that when you sign the document to accept your ballot, you are making a statutory declaration that says that you are qualified to vote in the city of Parksville. And if you saw someone that you thought lived outside the boundaries and that they were signing that declaration, then you have the ability to challenge them. And in essence, that starts an investigation into whether or not they are qualified voters. So there are some safeguards built into the system.
But, you know, unless their identification is literally forged, it's going to indicate their address, and our workers will have been trained to recognize that address is outside of the city. Yeah. But to your point, though, I get as many calls from outside of the city as I do from inside of the city, from folks that believe that they live inside the city of Parksville, especially renters who aren't receiving tax notices but have a Parksville number and even a Parksville address, right? So it is an issue, and I would be more concerned about just people wasting their time coming to our voting place when they should be heading somewhere else, but we can redirect them at that time. So, any further discussion on this? Call it. All right, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. Dare I say it, moving on to new business. And just reminding Council, we do have an in-camera after this, so if we could keep our presentations succinct. I know there are some interesting ones to come forward. And I'm going to start this time, in all fairness. I don't think we've started over on this side very recently, so go ahead, Councillor Morrison, and we'll work our way around.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know I tend to ramble on at new business, so I'll try to keep this short. I do have a couple of items. The first is a motion that I'd like to bring forward. That staff be requested to prepare a report outlining the city's current development processes, including options for providing additional efficiencies and/or time-saving procedures for the consideration of Council.
So you're bringing that motion forward. You'll require a seconder to put it on the floor. I actually got Councillor Greer here as a seconder. And then I'll open it to discussion. Did you want to address it further as the mover? I think you said enough, right? Yeah. So anyone else wish to speak to this? No one? All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you.
That's the longest conversation.
Yeah, no kidding. Is there anything else from you, Councillor Morrison?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
All right, very good.
I know. Chatterbox. I also put an email out to Council on the advisory board topic. We did receive a couple of comments back, but I would like to formalize a new direction for our advisory Council Advisory Committee, if anybody has any suggestions in that regard.
All right, so we did have a couple of suggestions there. Is there anyone around the council table right now that could think of anything else you might want our Citizens Advisory Committee to pursue? Do you think, Councillor Morrison, we could hold off until the 4th and just have a bit more of a, because I know you're waiting, and there was one I proposed which started to catch some traction, which was just looking at our current school facilities and maybe seeing what else could be done with them. And I know a lot of folks are looking at that as well. There was a question around parking that you were thinking about, but I know we were having some thought about that, and they did look at parking, I think, Councillor Greer, very recently. I think we need at least 2 topics to really make it worth their while. Go ahead, Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The other 2 that were brought up was the use for the city's vacant property down the end here. There's currently not being used, and the other one on the topic that you brought up regarding the possibility of saving some money on the water treatment plant, if there were some options that possibly still potable water, but the clarity of the water, whether that was something that we could
Thank you for reminding me. So ladies and gentlemen, what he's referring to, of course, is the big property here at the end of Jensen that's city-owned, and although we have it in the OCP, it would be interesting, I think, for the citizens advisors to kind of come back with some ideas as to what it potentially could be used for. And then with respect to the water treatment plant, we actually have the option, although I'm a little leery of it, we have the option of reducing substantially the cost, but we wouldn't be using chemicals to the extent that we were, and although we would have perfectly safe potable water, it might be stained. So it would be stained, as in it might look like tea when it comes out of your tap, right? So, yeah, but having said that, it actually would probably save us $10 million. But that would be something that we could throw out at the Citizens Advisory Committee. They could have all the same reaction you just had, in which case that would give us some advice back, and they are there just to make recommendations. So, I mean, those 2 options are kind of interesting. You want to do that? I think probably be best to make a little motion so we're all clear on what the Citizens Advisory Committee is doing. Did you want to do that, Councillor Morrison, as chair of that group?
All right. I move that the council move along to the advisory committee that we look at the possible uses for the city-owned lot at the end of Jensen, and also is there more than one option that we could reduce on the water plant, or is it just that one?
Well, that was just a specific question. Keep in mind there is a community working group that's already dealing with that issue, which is citizens from the community. So, okay. But that one particular topic might be interesting.
Okay. Looking at the possibility of reducing the cost of the water treatment plant with the possibility of the coloration being
Yeah, it's aesthetics only. That's the only thing. Is it worth spending $10 million for aesthetics? That's the question. Yes. And yes, I think you're probably right. But in it, yeah, okay. So, all right. So seconded by Councillor Powell-Davidson. Any further discussion on that? All in favor, opposed, and carried. Okay, very good. We give you something to do now. All right, Councillor Greer, did you have any? Is that it, Councillor Morrison? Councillor Greer, did you have anything?
I have nothing, Your Honor.
All right, excellent. Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick update. The province is holding a white paper discussion on disability throughout the province. This evening, the chair of the Access Oceanside Association is in Courtenay, attending that white paper discussion, and the Access Oceanside Association will be going to Victoria on February 26th to participate in that session. And the results, we're going to be having a pre-meeting later on this week on Thursday, and we'll be bringing that back to council for a full report on some of the issues in terms of employment, construction, accessibility, and the whole 9 yards.
All right, thank you, Councillor Lefebvre. Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple of meetings that I attended that might be of interest to people in the audience this evening. Councillor Morrison and I attended the opening announcements down at the Nanaimo Airport last week, where they announced the new service from Nanaimo to Seattle. That was extremely well attended, and everybody's very excited about that. I also, wearing my YouthLink hat, took my colleague from the Oceanside Homelessness Task Force to the YouthLink Committee, where we presented together to that committee and talked about homelessness, the homeless situation as it pertains to youth in our region, and that met with a lot of response and a lot of connections made. So I was really, really pleased to be able to help bring that together. I'm just giving council that notice that at our next meeting, I will be bringing forward 2 notices of motion. One in regards to the next election, where there are some changes I'd like to see made at our level in regards to the number of nominees and fees charged. The second notice of motion I will be bringing forward is in regards to correspondence that we all received from the Island North Film Commission, and I want to have some discussion around that. Thank you.
And we'll incorporate that correspondence into that meeting.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Councillor Neufeld, you're the last word to you almost.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. One of the comments that I wanted to make is that I'm very much in favor of what Councillor Morrison has come forward with, and our former chief engineer, and has in fact pushed for greater clarity as far as process with respect to applications of development and that type of thing. I think it's absolutely imperative. Not only timeliness, certainty of going forward and how it can be done. In fact, I wound up speaking at that meeting that many of us attended as far as the Canadian Home Builders Association in Nanaimo on the 9th of this month. One of the planners from North Cowichan, in fact, he and I got into a discussion, and basically that was what was of greatest concern for the developers there. In fact, one of the comments that he made to me, and I cannot quote, but I paraphrase, that the level of DCCs for that community was of marginal concern. It was the clarity and timeliness that was of importance to developers. Don't know how that would impact as far as DCCs are concerned. 2 things that somewhat more or less contentious. I attended 2 meetings of the Beach Fest Society on the 11th and the 13th. One was a 4-hour planning meeting. The other was a 2-hour monthly meeting, and they seem to be in really good shape. I think that the new directors that they have are really quite exemplary and are keen. They are going forward. I think it's going to be a great spectacular summer. I can't tell you what the theme is. That will be up to a release. There will be a number of press releases coming out concerning where they're going, but it looks really tremendous. If we can only have the same weather, that would be the great thing to go forward with. But it looks good the way it's shaping up. New souvenirs, new clothes, new basis, new people. So I think it's looking really good. One of the things that Councillor Powell-Davidson and I attended was the Chamber business-to-business session at the Parksville and District Historical Society. Really quite an interesting group, a good turnout. I didn't know what to expect, but in fact met some fascinating people. In fact, one of the people, I can't recall his name now, the jeweler that actually made the presentation that we, as a Beach Fest Society, gave to the retiring Joan Lemoyne was there, and we had a chat about what he does and his store over on Middleton. Fascinating people, fascinating stories that we have and bringing in what we have. So we have a dynamic community, and I would like to see it grow, and it is growing. It's a matter of enhancing the growth and making sure that we can afford it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen, and our time with you is about to come to an end. However, our business continues. And what I'm looking for now under special business is a mover that, pursuant to Section 91A of the Community Charter, Council proceed to a closed meeting to consider an item related to personal information. Long story short, folks, we're reviewing resumes for people that are volunteering their time to various boards. And I need that as a motion.